So thank you all so much for joining the virtual presentation Friday. I am your host with the most, Micah Hunt. I work, for those of you that don't know me really, I work for a real estate company in Virginia. Don't worry, I am not a realtor. There's not going to be something that I say, I'm going to sell your house and give you all these perks and different things. That's not what I'm doing. I help seniors downsize is my job, but as you all know, seniors don't want to go anywhere right now. And everything's on lockdown, and I wanted to create something that was still keeping us professionals from all over the country together and being informed and educated on things that are going on and resources in the community and different ways to reach to seniors and different ways to approach. So today, without further ado, this wonderful lady started this virtual presentation Friday in May, and we're bringing her back with another topic that's really a good one. So Rachael Wonderlin, and before I turn it over to Rachael, if everybody could, I did this last week and it was really cool to see, if you can type in where you're watching from, I would greatly appreciate that, because last week we actually had people from Canada and even Sweden. So I would love to know where you're listening from and watching from. So that'd be great. Rachael Wonderlin, take it away. I am muting myself.
Hi. Yeah, you're right. I was the first presenter for this. Yeah, back in May. Like, I don't know how months work anymore, so I had to go look and see when I presented. I was like, that was back in May? What year is it? Who am I? You know, things like questions like this. Okay, so I'm about to share my screen. Here we go. All right. Here we go. How to live in someone else's reality, even when it's challenging. And sometimes it is quite challenging. That's me. I have a master's in gerontology, which is the study of aging. Some of you probably have talked to me before. I've talked to you guys. You get my emails, blah, blah, blah. I am a dementia care consultant. I work with senior living companies on their dementia care programs. I love what I do. I was a dementia care director for years, and then my book was coming out with Johns Hopkins University Press in 2016. I branched off and started my own thing, and I'm still doing it, and it's going quite well. If you have any interest in improving your dementia care community or know somebody who does, get in touch. Let's chat. So these are my books. My first and second book, my audio book actually is coming soon for my first book, what you see there, When Someone You Know is Living in a Dementia Care Community. It's published by Johns Hopkins University Press. That came out in November of 2016. And at least at the time, it was the only book on the market really about moving somebody to a care community. So I am recording now my audio book for that book. I'm recording it in my house, in my bedroom closet, because a closet is actually like a really good place for sound. So I'm recording it there with a professional mic, and I have a professional editor. So I'm sending the files over to him, and he says, you can't even tell I'm in a closet. So that is just a little secret between you and me and the other 60 plus people on this phone call. My brand new book is called Creative Engagement, Handbook of Activities for People Living with Dementia. That is out in a couple weeks. I have a copy in my hand. You can't see it because it keeps blending into my background, but I have it, so it does exist. But if you pre-ordered it, it will be in your hands hopefully in a couple weeks. Amazon does have them available for pre-order, and I have over 900 pre-orders, I think, something crazy like that. So that's pretty cool. Also, want to tell you real quick about something I recently created. It is a care partner coaching program. So it is for people who have a loved one with dementia, and they may be caring from afar. They may be caring for them in the same house. They may be caring for a person who's living in a care community, but in any way they interact with a person living with dementia. This is a coaching program. So it is about an hour and a half of a class that I have. They can go through at their own pace on my Dementia by Day School program. and includes a 30-minute call with me directly. And it is going to be, you're gonna have access to a forum where you can log on, ask questions, chat with other care partners who are in the class, and chat with me. So I'll be able to log on, answer people's questions. And in the past, I do phone calls, so people can do one-to-one phone calls with me. This just feels like a way better way to offer recurring assistance to people who need it, so they can log on at any point and type a message and get a response instead of having to like set up a call with me. Also, this whole program for lifetime access is $250. A call with me is $100 for like one phone call, so it kind of makes sense. I made a code for you. If you enroll in this today or tomorrow, you can use the code Micah for $50 off. So there you go. That's your code. If you want to enroll in it today, you get $50 off the $250. So it's a $200 thing, one-time fee. There you go. Tell us people about it. Let's jump in. If you follow my stuff, if you've been on this before, you've seen me present, you know I talk about this all the time, what it means to embrace someone's reality. I love this phrase so much that I trademarked it. It was a pain in the butt. In fact, the process is still like, it's just a long, ongoing process. But embracing someone's reality essentially means you find a way to get into the world of the person living with dementia without dragging your own reality and truth into the situation. So how can you live in that person's world without bringing your own world into it and trying to correct them or, anything like that? So let me tell you a quick little story, because I know I've told this before, but this kind of definitely brings us into the topic today. I had a resident named Eileen years ago, and Eileen went out on our community's bus to her doctor's appointment. But as she was coming back, she really wanted to go home. She didn't want to come back to our senior living community and wouldn't get off the bus. It took me about 2 hours to get this lady off the bus. And the way I did it was by embracing her reality. I didn't really have a name for it at the time. But what I found was that I needed to live in what made sense to her. And what made sense to her was that we were going to stop, get off at this hotel for, an hour, and then get on another bus, and that bus would take her to her house. Telling her that she lived here now, or that she couldn't go home, or explaining any of that stuff to her, trying to distract her, trying to redirect her, none of that stuff was working. The only thing that worked was living in what was true for her and going with that. When I first started working in dementia care, I learned all of the same things that everybody else learns. Hopefully you learn not to reorient anybody with dementia, right? Saying, oh, don't you remember? Your parents died years ago. You have dementia. You live here now. Any of that crazy, terrible stuff that we could tell somebody living with dementia. And of course, I learned about redirection, distraction, and validation. All of these are great methods. The thing that I kept running into is that these methods always tell people never to lie to somebody with dementia. And while that sounds great, it's really hard to say that to someone who's new to the world, especially a family caregiver who is like, oh, don't lie. Okay, well then I'll tell my mom exactly what is true for me. And what is true for you is probably not the same thing that's true for her. So families here don't lie, and they go, oh, okay, let me tell them exactly what's happening. No. Dementia care is very much a gray area. It's a dance. It's not black and white, right? And so it's very hard to explain this kind of thing when you say things like don't lie, or, just redirect, just distract. That's not always going to get the job done. And I found that to be very true with Eileen. That really stood out to me. I thought, okay, how can I really help this woman and not bring in my own truth? Because probably a week or so after that, same lady, she's sitting in the front of our community and she's looking really sad. I said, Eileen, what's wrong? She said, well, I just found out my parents died and I'm missing their funeral. And I'm like, oh crap, right? Like, I can't correct her. I can't say, oh, don't worry, your parents died years ago. That's not going to make her feel any better. She's going to be wondering what she's been doing for the last however many years. So instead I said, I'm so sorry that happened, Eileen, but you know what? I found out their funeral's on Thursday, so don't worry, you're not going to miss the service. She brightened up immediately. After that, I was able to distract her and get her into a program doing something. She moved on, she forgot about it. But that initial emotion, being able to live in that world and do the true emotion that was true for her, solving that emotional problem was so key. Being able to share with her that I found out their funeral was in a couple days. Now, a lot of people would feel like, oh, well, that's lying. You lied to her. Well, if we want to look at things in a very black and white way like that, I think dementia care is going to be pretty tough. We have to find ways to do what is true for the person with dementia. So I like to tell caregivers, take the word lying, throw it away, stop getting hung up on this phrase, and instead think about embracing someone's reality. Sounds a lot nicer, and I think it's a lot easier to do when we put a name to it. So just to give you another example, if we are talking to somebody with dementia, how can we move into what is true for them? What do we choose, right? Which option do we go with? Our reality is over here in the triangle, and her reality is over here in the circle, right? She's 38, she's in the prime of her career, her parents live nearby. Let's do that. Let's do what is true for her instead of what's true for us. Even when it comes to dealing with it when it's hard. So I talked about hallucinations actually on my call back in May, my webinar in May. I'm going to dive into the stuff that makes embracing someone's reality really difficult. The stuff where people say to me, well, that's great, Rachel, but what about blah, blah, blah? Okay, well, I got you covered. We're going to talk about that. Embracing someone's reality means you let go of any need that you have to be right. So when it comes to hallucinations, what do we do? One of my residents a few years back believed the whole building was on fire. This was a real issue because she was going around screaming that there was a fire, and it was really freaking out the other residents. And the staff kept saying things like, don't worry, there's no fire. To which the lady's like, well, you're stupid because the fire's right there. She's actively hallucinating. She sees a fire. Telling her there's no fire, not getting the job done. What I ended up doing was listening to what the real problem was. And the real problem is that she was afraid. She was scared. And the fear is the thing that you want to connect with. How do you embrace someone's reality when it's hard? Look past the initial problem and look into the actual thing, which is, in this case, that she's afraid. So what I ended up doing was going on this little nifty device I have in my pocket and going to YouTube and pulling up a fire truck noise and playing the fire truck noise and saying, oh, don't worry, the fire truck is coming. She calmed down immediately. She went to her room, she laid down, took a nap. Okay, dealing with the actual fear. I solved the emotional problem instead of the physical one. How can I do what is true for that person where they're at that moment? Now, some point recently, probably within the last 6 months, I posted this kind of story on LinkedIn. And I had a couple people say, but there was no fire. And I said, yeah, you're right. But what was the other option? And the response I got was, well, you should just have redirected her and validated her by saying, you know, it sounds like you're afraid of fire. And I was like, what? That's not going to get, everybody's afraid of fire to some extent, right? I mean, we're all a little bit inherently afraid of fire. Duh. So I can't sit there and say, sounds like you're afraid of, this isn't a therapy session. I'm trying to solve her emotional immediate problem, which is that she's terrified. Trying to distract her, get her to do something else, that's not going to happen. I got to find a way to live in her world and solve that emotional problem. Let's do that, right? How do we do that? Same thing here with delusions. Now, people sometimes will confuse hallucinations and delusions. Hallucinations are when you're sensing something. So you're actually hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling something that is not there. A delusion, on the other hand, this is a lot more common for people living with dementia, where you're just having a thought, a belief that is not true. And delusions are quite common. So as another example, I had a guy who wanted to finish his college degree. Now, in our reality, this man was in his late 80s. He had vascular cognitive impairment, vascular dementia. He was definitely not going back to finish his degree. This man went on a hunger strike in the dining room for a couple days. He was like, I'm not eating until somebody signs me up for college. And the staff is just like kind of ignoring him. They're like, oh, whatever, Paul will be fine. Like, he'll get over it. I said, but what if we solved his problem? So I went back to my office and I printed out a sheet of paper that said, welcome to Alamance Community College, which was the community college near us in Burlington, North Carolina at the time. And I brought it in and I handed him the paper and I said, Paul, I got you this. What kind of classes are you interested in taking? And he got this huge smile and he said, thank you. No one else has helped me. And he wrote history. History was the class that he needed to finish. I think I might still have that paper. I saved it. And I'm walking out of the dining room feeling very effective. And one of my staff members was like, well, what are you going to do when he asks about going to college and you can't bring him? And I said, one, he's probably not going to ask because I solved his emotional problem. I was right. Two, college starts next semester. It's always next semester. So you just say it'll be next semester and you just put it off, right? Solved it. But the thing is, he never asked about it, but just solved the emotional problem instead of the physical one. The physical one is that he can't go, right? He can't go. Telling him that, not solving the problem, just making him mad. How do we solve the problem? We become a dementia detective. Through all these things. Is someone hungry, tired, sick, or experiencing a new illness or pain? Are they bored, overstimulated, frustrated by someone or something, afraid, feeling as though they don't have control, which I will come back to in one second, experiencing delirium, experiencing learned helplessness, which I will also come back to in a second, on a new medication. When people feel like they don't have control over their environment, they start to act in ways that maybe they wouldn't normally. I think we've all experienced this fairly recently with COVID. Things have been different than they were before in a lot of ways, and it is uncomfortable. And there's a kind of a less now than there was before, but when I first started going to the grocery store, when this was happening, like I first started going to Whole Foods, like my first 2 trips to Whole Foods, I think I had a panic attack a little bit after both of them, coming out of the store, just being like, whoa, that was a lot. And my husband was like, well, what happened? And I said, well, really nothing, but it was the feeling in the Whole Foods. It was this feeling where everybody was like masked up, kind of like not moving quickly per se, but just kind of moving with a sense of purpose and fear at the same time. Like you were kind of dodging people. Everybody's kind of like looking at each other like, who is gonna infect me? There was this kind of like, just, especially when this first happened, this fear when you were in there, and you could just, it was tangible, like you could feel it. on coming off of everybody's skin, like this kind of pain, right? And I think that comes a lot from this feeling of loss of control. Like we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, really, really, we never know what's going to happen ever. But you still feel to some degree like you have some control over your life. With COVID, and then you have to think, if you're living with a cognitive impairment, people are making a lot of decisions for you, right? You're not necessarily in control of everything that happens all day, every day. So if you don't feel like you have control, you're going to maybe start acting in ways that you wouldn't normally. And we see this a lot with dementia. So I really want you to think about this when you're talking to somebody with a cognitive impairment and they're maybe behaving in a way that you didn't expect or behaving in a way that you don't particularly like. Think about how this person is experiencing their world. I also want to mention here learned helplessness. Learned helplessness was a term coined by a psychologist by the name of Martin Seligman years ago. And he mostly used it to refer to people living with depression. As we know, dementia and depression do go hand in hand a lot. But I just think of it on its own thing with dementia. If you are constantly being shown that you are helpless, for example, somebody's always buttoning up your coat, somebody's always putting on your shoes for you, someone's helping you use the bathroom, someone's helping, whatever. You are learning over time that you are helpless. And we don't really want to do this to people at all. So I always encourage caregivers, professional or family, to ensure that they're letting the person living with dementia have some small things in their life they can still do and have control over, such as, like, even if it takes them extra time for them to cut up their food, let them cut up their food, right? Even if it takes them extra time to do a chore around the house, let them do the chore around the house, right? With the medication, we always want to make sure that somebody is on the right medication. Antipsychotic drugs are especially challenging when it comes to working with older adults, as I'm sure you all are very aware, are sometimes definitely necessary. I've talked to people who are like, no medications, ever. Yeah, I think there are people who are so, I've had residents, I had one lady in particular who was the most anxious person I've ever met in my entire life. And you could see it when you met her daughter. You were like, okay, I see this family situation. Everybody's an anxious mess. She absolutely needed to be on medication to quell that anxiety just so she could have a good day. That said, we always want to be sure that medication that people are on aren't having really awful side effects, unintended consequences, or causing people to act in certain ways that we wouldn't expect. Personal preferences are key when you're solving for things. Like when you get, for example, a new resident or in home care, like a new client, think about who this person actually is. What major life experiences shaped him? And this is one thing I'll say about, when you're learning to embrace someone's reality, you need to know who they are, right? You need to know what their personal preferences are, because it's not going to help you if you have no clue who they are. And this is why intake forms, if someone's, coming into your community, or even you're sending caregivers out to them, those forms, those life enrichment forms, usually aren't that great. They need to be more detailed, because this is the stuff that you need to know, like the real key, like little details that make that person who they are and their personal preferences. So what major life experiences shaped this person? His beautiful moments, the things he's proud of, graduation, a wedding, whatever. And then traumas, things that he's not going to want to talk about, or things that with dementia are going to come up for him that you may not know about beforehand. And suddenly he's talking about something horrible that happened to him and you have no context for it and you're not sure what it is, right? You want to have some context. What time he bathes and how. Shower, is it a bath? Is it simply a wet washcloth, right? These are all actually really important things. How he parts his hair, or if he always ironed his clothes. If suddenly this guy is super grumpy, you're like, what's up with this guy? Was he always someone who had his clothes pressed and suddenly he's wearing like a really wrinkled shirt? Is that enough to totally ruin his day? Maybe. What his favorite foods are, what time exactly he enjoys his coffee, right? Who his idols are and were, his favorite music, his least favorite music. I have said this often, this is kind of just like a little side note. I'm so curious to see what happens in senior living in the future with regards to music. I don't know if people are just going to be listening to it on their headphones, because music, if you talk about like music from the 40s, music from the 50s, there's like a set, there's certain bands that you're like, oh, this is what this music is like. But now there are so many different varieties of music. I'm really curious. I'm looking forward to, some like some of my favorite music being popular in senior living, like when I'm in senior living. I'm really looking forward to some like Lil Jon and the East Side Boys, like some real party music. You want to know when this person eats, right? What they like to eat, what they don't like to eat. All of these things are really important. You got to know who this person is. Oh, here we go. Diving into this movie. You may have heard me talk about this before. This, I think, is so important when you're embracing someone's reality, even when it's hard, because this is a question you're going to get often because of movies like this. People say to you, but what if I go to visit my loved one, or I call my loved one, or whatever, and they don't know who I am? They're not going to know who I am. Now, as we know, if you've worked in dementia care for a while, or you're in the field in some fashion, most people going through their disease process are able to recognize everybody in their family. There are times where it's a little fuzzy. And then there are people who have a lot of trouble placing loved ones on their timeline. I call this timeline confusion. This idea that someone living with dementia may at some point have trouble placing their loved ones on a timeline that makes sense in their reality. And let me run through this movie real quick. So I could never find a clip of this exact scene that bugs me, but I made my own. So here we go. There is this scene in the movie The Notebook from 2004. If you haven't seen it, shame on you. You should see it. It's a classic, but I've got some problems with it. And one of the problems that I have with it is that it depicts dementia in a really inaccurate Hollywood way. Spoiler alert, every day this man, who's her husband, comes and reads to her. And apparently she has no clue who he is. Frankly, most of the time she seems even unaware that he's in the room. And then one day they're dancing. You can see the little clip up in the corner. They're dancing and she's totally lucid, but she's lucid in a way that makes it look like dementia is a hat that you like take off and put away. Like, that's not what dementia is, but that's the way they make it look. So they're dancing and all of a sudden she's like, how long before I forget again? He says, last time it was only a few minutes. And she says, I miss you so much. And he says, I've been right here. I'll never leave you. And then 2 seconds later, she's like, who are you? It's totally crazy. That's not how this works. But it scared the crap out of people. And when I saw it in 2004, I was like, oh, yeah, that must be what dementia is. That's what that looks like, right? And I was actually, at that point, I was volunteering in a senior living community at that point, but I didn't really have too much experience other than that volunteering experience and like stuff that, the media showed me. So I was like, oh, that's what this is. Right? Like, ideally, this is probably more like what it would be. She'd probably be like, if this was real life, she'd probably be like, oh, I know this guy. He's my, and then she would assign an identity to him that made sense in her reality, right? She'd assign an identity to him that fit on her timeline. like, oh, this is my dad, right? Because he looks familiar, he sounds familiar, and he's the right age. The problem is they skipped over this whole idea of timeline confusion, really, which is the concept that a person just can't place you on their timeline. I say to families all the time, it's not that they don't love you. It's not that they don't recognize you. It's not that they don't know you. It's that they can't place you on a timeline that makes sense to them. And that is something that becomes really challenging for people because they feel so inclined to tell a person living with dementia who they are. Like, don't you remember I'm your so-and-so? Or the worst is where someone will go visit a loved one with dementia and say, oh, do you remember me? What an uncomfortable thing to say to somebody. And you know that's true if you've ever been in, you've been to like a party or something, or you've seen someone on the street and they go, hey, Rachel, remember me? And you're like, oh, yes, and this happened to me especially a lot before, COVID times, because I do improv comedy. So I'm on stage a lot. And I also do a lot of dementia care, speaking. So especially in Pittsburgh, where I live, I would regularly run into people who would be like, oh my God, Rachel, hey. And I'd be like, hello. And I'm thinking like, please don't ask me if I know who you are, because I don't. And I'm like looking for context clues. I'm looking at who they're with. I'm hoping they'll give me a clue as to how I know them, And there were times where they gave me no clues. I remember walking with a friend and this woman came up and she's talking to me. And my friend said to me, oh, do you know her? After the lady left. And I said, I have no clue who that lady is. And I'm so glad that she didn't ask me to tell her who she was. This comes back to, don't put people with dementia in uncomfortable situations where they have to tell you who you are to them. Let them decide who you are and then go with that, okay? Do not push your reality on somebody with dementia. It's not gonna go great, and it's gonna be uncomfortable for everybody involved. So if you're embracing someone's reality effectively, you are living on their timeline, you're living in with truth for them, even when it's hard for you, even when you're uncomfortable with the whole thing. Even when you don't think that their reality makes any sense, or it doesn't work for you, or you feel like they've asked the same question 3 million times, if you're doing what's true for them, you are doing the absolute best you can, whatever that means to their reality. And so I really want to kind of open it up now to conversation, discussion here, and chat with everybody. I also want to remind you all about this. This is my Care Partner Coaching Program. I am opening it up also to senior living communities and to home care agencies who want to buy it for their residents or clients' families. So if you're thinking that ongoing education for your residents' family members would be helpful, the answer is yeah. Get in touch, we'll set that up. But if you as an individual want to sign up for this lifetime program for $250, you can get $50 off today with your code Micah. Yeah, see what I did there, Micah? Good, yes, that's that guy. Made him his own code. So if you want to sign up, you can check that out at that link up there, dementiabydayschool.com, and you can just look on the page, it'll say Care Partner Coaching, you can look at it. But let me know if you have any questions about that. So thank you all for tuning into this. I've left some time here to talk because I think that's really valuable. And the last time we had, we went over by a while because everybody had lots of things to say. So I'd love to hear your stories, your questions, your challenges with this, and anything else. So I'm gonna stop my sharing, and I'm gonna look and see if okay, everybody's just telling us where we're from. That's good. A lot of people from Virginia. I went to college at Mary Washington, by the way, in Fredericksburg. So if you are in Fredericksburg, give me a shout out. Hello, Karen Cornish. Thank you. Thank you.
So, does anybody have any questions? Raise your hand. If you're not sharing your screen, we will not be able to see you raising your hand. So, if you have a question, either use the cool reactions thing to go wave hand, and we will find you. Otherwise, we might miss over you. So
Oh,
if you have
and freebie. I have a couple free things on my RachelWonderlin.com website. I have a couple free downloads there on the products page. So if you want free stuff, go to that RachelWonderlin.com page.
I'm looking, I'm not seeing anybody raising their hands yet.
Nobody ever wants to be the first person.
No, not at all. Ever, never. Does anybody ever want to be the first person? I do. But I'm hosting, so I don't have to ask questions. I'm running this thing. So, anybody have any questions?
Oh, who went to Mary Washington? Stephanie went to Mary Washington. Yeah. I don't know where you are, Stephanie. There's 4 pages of people, but yeah.
Annette Fisher has a question.
I just want to say, thank you very much, Rachel. I am not a social worker or anything like that. I work in the real estate and mortgage brokerage field, and I've taken several classes. I concentrate mainly on seniors, and I took a dementia class, and it's just like you were saying, they don't want you to like lie to the person and all. And I just felt like so conflicted when I was sitting in the class because my dealing with people, my approach is never that, like, if they're demented, I'm not going to make them see reason. So I kind of got to go with the flow, but figure out that they're not talking about real reality, and I got to pick up on all of that. But I also don't want to be arguing with them because they're not going to see whatever, like you said, my reality is. So I just really appreciated your freshness on the subject.
Awesome. Yeah, it's that way. I felt the same way. I was super conflicted. I was like, wait a second, which is also, I built like a whole training for care community settings and really for home care too. Because we all got the same kind of education, right? They put us in front of a bunch of DVDs and they're like, all right, nailed it. Like, there you go, that's it. And like, that's not enough information. We need more. And I think dementia care needs to be this kind of conversation, for people to be able to talk to each other and share their stories and delve into this gray area.
Jennifer Stell, you had a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All righty. So I don't have a question, but rather a comment. I just want to say that I've often heard the term to use and have used it myself of therapeutic lying, but I do like the idea of using the term embrace their reality much better. It sounds so much better. And I like that, I often have to tell families that they have to step into their world, step out of yours, step into theirs. But I do like that idea of embracing the reality.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually just my Monday email, I send out an email every Monday just to my subscribers. And my Monday email was like, the title of it was something like, I hate the term therapeutic lying because it sounds bad, because the problem with the word lying is you hear it and you've been told your whole life, don't lie. So you're like, okay, but then it's therapeutic lying. You're like, what does that mean? Huh? And that's why I'm just like, let's just get rid of that. The term I actually hate more is fiblets, like a little fib, like a fiblet. I'm like, it sounds like a giblet. It sounds like part of a turkey. And then the other thing that I like, white lies, like white lies is where you tell your friend that she looks good in that dress, even though she does not, but that's a white lie. But actually that's kind of painful too, because you don't want her wearing that anywhere if it doesn't look good. Like if I have something in my teeth, like you need to tell me about that. I'm not trying to go in front of a group of people and have something in my teeth and be like, the person before I hung out with before, just be like, oh, I didn't want to make you feel bad. It's like, well, now I feel worse. I'm in front of more people.
So 2 more questions. Eric, I'll come to you in just a minute. Morgan, you had a question first.
Yes. So I care for my 90-year-old grandmother, and she's still kind of in the early stages of everything. I have a hard time distinguishing delusions and hallucinations.
Okay. So a hallucination, I always ask, is she, like a hallucination is typically people will see or hear / talk to. Children or animals are the most common ones that people see or hear. So if she's talking to somebody who's not there, or she's like pointing, like here's the difference between a delusion and a hallucination. A hallucination would be, my mom's sitting right here. That's a hallucination because she's not here. A delusion would be like if I was 100 years old and I said, oh, I talked to my mom on the phone yesterday, or my mom was here yesterday and we talked.
Okay.
You see the difference? Because like a delusion would be a fixed false idea, like,
Okay.
but a hallucination is like an active, like this person is right here, or
More present, and a delusion is more past.
an idea. Yeah, a delusion is an idea of
Okay.
something, but it becomes confusing because they could say, well, I saw that person yesterday, and you're like, well, was that a hallucination or a delusion? And you have to operate under the assumption that it's a delusion unless they're like, oh, I saw them yesterday, here they are again today, and then you go, okay. And hallucinations are common for people with Lewy body diseases, LEWY. But in other types of dementia, such even as Alzheimer's disease, the hallucinations are not as common. And so if someone is all of a sudden hallucinating, like Monday they were fine, Tuesday they were fine, Wednesday they're like talking to somebody in the corner, you may want to get them evaluated for a urinary tract infection, something like that. There could be something medical going on causing them to hallucinate.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Eric.
Great, Rachel, great job.
Thank you.
A couple things is, I don't know if we've had Tim Sutton on this, but I know you work with Tim.
Mhm.
He's a police officer local
Mhm.
here to Richmond that
Yep.
has some great stuff on dementia training for people in the protective services. So I think that would be a really good topic, and congratulations to you for getting hooked up with him. He's a great guy.
You can
as well.
actually see our, I don't know if you saw it before, but we did a webinar last week, and I put the recording up with me and Tim. I put the
Yeah.
recording up on my YouTube channel. So if you want to
Okay.
check that out. But yeah, he would be a good person to have on here. Like now you probably have too many people, Micah, who want to come on here. Like I hooked you up with somebody too. Dr. Ann Kenny, who wrote another Johns Hopkins book about grief and loss and like end of life planning. It's really, really interesting stuff. But yeah.
And he's local here to Richmond, so
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah.
Yes,
The other thing, Rachel, I'm going to do this. You did these.
I did.
Yeah, and so
You got
actually, yeah, I got some. They're great, and I actually passed them off to Kitty Gale, and I don't know, Kitty Gale, if you used them, if they worked or not. But another great idea, and love the innovation. So these are clear face masks,
Yeah.
and
They're
for
from-
hard of hearing, yeah, and so people also with dementia, I think it lowers
Yeah.
the confusion.
I
So-
use them the past so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I was with one of my clients, Cardinal Senior Living and Cardinal Senior Management, and they have communities out in Eastern PA. So I was actually out there traveling around, and it was great. And I wore those into all the communities, and the staff was like, what is that? And so I brought some and handed them out. And also the residents seemed to respond really well to them.
Yep.
Because they could see my mouth, they can see you talking. They're not as portable. So like, I love the cloth ones because you can just stick them in your pocket. But in terms of communication, those are the best that I've seen.
Yeah.
And remember there's like a film on the front of them that you can pull off, which is super weird. So remember to
Yeah.
pull off that little film. I have no idea why that's on there.
Yeah.
And
Anyway.
Got another question. Oh, go ahead.
I just say thanks for all those good tips. So
oh
follow
yeah,
on
you're very welcome.
LinkedIn, YouTube. She's got good stuff coming
Thank
through
you.
all the time. Yep.
Yeah, I did a whole video on it and I put it on YouTube, and it has like 2,500, it's like a ton of views, and mostly all nice comments. And somebody asked me if I was related to Kristen Bell, and I said, no, but I'll take it. I'll take it. I was like, for a YouTube comment, it's like, oh my God, you get a comment, you're like, what's this gonna be? Like, who's gonna tell me about myself? I don't want to hear about it.
Ann Perkins, you had your hand raised. I'm asking you to unmute. You're still muted. Unmute yourself.
Struggle.
There you go.
There I go. Thank you. You mentioned Lewy body, and I work a lot with the Parkinson's community, and I'm a Parkinsonian myself. So I have a great desire to make sure people are aware of what Lewy body is. Lewy body affects both the mind and Parkinson's symptoms. So it's a Parkinsonism form. It's what Robin Williams had that led to his depression.
Yes.
So we have about 40% of Parkinson's patients who have dementia. And as they get older, they are more apt to get it. So I wonder if you have any hints for how we can deal with a Parkinson's person who's dealing with the movement disorder, and suddenly you notice they have dementia as well. How do you face them and tell them?
That is a real challenge. I never try to tell anybody that they have dementia, because I think some people are in denial, right, about the fact that they have it. Also, I'm not a physician, so I wouldn't be in a place to like make that diagnosis. So I wouldn't be the initial person. I try to treat it like any other dementia, where I'm going to live in what's true for them. There's an extra added challenge with Lewy body, right? Because people are more apt to hallucinate. And so you really do want to still go with the flow on those hallucinations. But yeah, Lewy body is tough because, like I said, a lot of people with Parkinson's do end up getting Parkinson's disease dementia. Not always. They do go hand in hand. Parkinson's is considered a Lewy body disease. But yeah, Lewy body is definitely an added challenge because of those Parkinson's symptoms, the tremors and shaking. Yeah. I did have a resident, one of my first experiences with Lewy body was I had a resident who moved in and was, by all accounts, totally fine, at least according to my staff. They were like, she doesn't need to be here, she's fine. She had Lewy body, so she has this fluctuating impairment. And I said, well, give it some time. Like, let's not just assume this woman is, you know, here and shouldn't be here, right? And about a week later, she was so confused and agitated and upset. And a couple days after that, she was back to her normal self and she was fine again. So like to see that change in her disease was really was really surprising. I'd not seen, you know, this was pretty early on, but I was like really surprised to see the change in her from day to day.
Follow-up question to that is, what percentage of people do you see changing their personality and character from a happy-go-lucky person to perhaps someone who's dangerous?
Not often. I would say, I'll say that people tend to become more of themselves. Like they lose that filter. So they tend to become, like if they were already a little bit loud, they get real loud. People lose their filter, so they become a little bit less filtered. Frontotemporal diseases tend to affect your ability to make decisions, plan, that executive functioning. So people with frontotemporal dementia will sometimes be quite different than they were before. But generally speaking, I've mostly noticed that people are about the same. I think that there is a fear for a lot of people that somebody's going to get dementia and be like do a complete 180 on their personality. I see that rarely.
Thank you.
Anybody else? And while we're waiting for other people to ask their questions, we have a Kathy and a Stephanie. If you could chat your last name, I would greatly appreciate it because I want to make sure you get the email after this call and the recording and everything. So Jennifer, you had another question. Here we go. Jennifer Stell, go ahead.
So just another comment to Anne, who was asking about how you talk to someone who has Parkinson's, who may recognize now that they're having some dementia and has been given the dementia diagnosis along with it. I think, and what I have done in the past, because I've noticed residents with Parkinson's and dementia are younger and still very cognizant of what's going on, I have recommended therapy so that they can have a real sense of what's going on, talk about their fears. They're very fearful. So therapy with, just a counselor, not psychiatry, but just therapy, someone they can talk to, who may be familiar with that, but also just helping them understand maybe what to expect. Eventually, they're not going to realize what's going on, but the initial, year or so before, or even 2 to 3 years before they are completely disoriented, they do have a lot of fears, and they're very aware of what is going on.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Anybody else have a question or comment at all? Nobody anywhere? Okay, well, I saw Shauna open your face, so I don't know if that meant you wanted to share anything. Okay, no. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.